My husband emptied our entire joint account for his secretary and thought he'd left me penniless. What he didn't know was that my grandmother's $2.3 million trust fund had just matured, and I was about to turn his betrayal into the biggest mistake of his life. 3 weeks later, when the foreclosure notice arrived at his dream house, he finally understood what real devastation felt like.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
The sound of drawers slamming echoed through our Riverside Hills home as I walked into what used to be our shared office. Oliver was shoving documents into a leather briefcase with the kind of frantic energy I'd only seen during his worst work crises. But this wasn't about work. The printouts scattered across his desk told a different story. Bank statements, property transfers, and what looked like apartment rental agreements. "Going somewhere?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He didn't look up, didn't pause in his manic packing, just kept stuffing papers into that briefcase like his life depended on it, which I was beginning to realize it probably did. "Marianne, we need to talk." His voice carried none of the warmth I'd grown accustomed to over 15 years of marriage. Instead, there was something cold and final in his tone, like a judge delivering a verdict. I stepped further into the room, noticing for the first time how he'd already cleared out his side of the office. His diploma was gone from the wall, the family photo from our anniversary trip to Napa Valley had disappeared from his desk. Even his favorite coffee mug, the one I'd given him when he made partner at Jerome & Associates, was nowhere to be seen. "Oliver, what's happening?" He finally stopped moving, his hands gripping the edge of the mahogany desk we'd picked out together when we bought this house. When he looked at me, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, but complete emotional detachment, like he was looking at a stranger. "I'm leaving, Marianne, today." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step backward, my hand reaching for the doorframe to steady myself. "Leaving? What do you mean leaving?" "I mean, I'm done with this marriage, done with this life, done pretending to be happy in a relationship that's been over for years." Years? I searched his face for some sign that this was a cruel joke, some indication that the man I'd shared a bed with just last night was still in there somewhere. But his expression remained flat, almost bored, like he was discussing the weather. "Oliver, this is insane. Yesterday we were planning our trip to see your parents next month. Yesterday you told me you loved me." Yesterday, I was still trying to convince myself that was true. Each word felt like a knife. I sank into the chair across from his desk, the same chair where I'd sat countless evenings, helping him review contracts, celebrating his victories, supporting him through his failures. Now it felt foreign, uncomfortable, like everything else in this room. Is there someone else? The question fell out of my mouth before I could stop it, though part of me already knew the answer. The late nights at the office that had become routine, the way he'd started showering immediately when he came home, the phone calls he'd take in another room, speaking in hushed tones about client confidentiality. Oliver's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This isn't about anyone else, Marianne. This is about me needing to be honest about what I want from my life." But I could see it in his eyes, the slight shift, the way he couldn't quite meet my gaze when he said it. There was someone else. There had probably been someone else for months. Who is she? "Marianne, don't do this to yourself." "Who is she, Oliver?" He stood up abruptly, snapping the briefcase closed with a sharp click. "Her name is Cynthia. She works at the firm. And before you ask, yes, it's been going on for a while." Cynthia? I knew that name. Oliver had mentioned her before, his new paralegal, the one who was so efficient and really understood the business. The one who'd been working those late nights with him, helping with the Morrison case that seemed to require endless evening meetings. How long? Does it matter? It matters to me. Oliver pulled a manila envelope from his desk drawer and set it down in front of me. 8 months. 8 months. I stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it, afraid to know what documents it contained. 8 months meant this wasn't some sudden infatuation. This was planned, calculated, deliberate. What's in the envelope? Divorce papers. I've already signed them. I need you to sign them too. The room started to spin. This couldn't be real. Divorce papers? He'd already filed for divorce without telling me, without even hinting that he was unhappy. I'd been living in a marriage that had already ended, and I was the last person to know. Oliver, we can work through this. We can go to counseling. I don't want to work through this. His voice cut through my desperate suggestions like a blade. I want out, Marianne. I want to start over with someone who makes me alive again. The cruelty of that statement took my breath away. 15 years of marriage, and he was reducing our entire relationship to me not making him feel alive. As if I was some burden he'd been carrying, some obligation he was finally ready to shed. What about our life together? Our home? Our plans? I've already made arrangements. He gestured toward the envelope. The house will need to be sold, obviously. The proceeds will be split according to the prenup we signed. Prenup? I'd almost forgotten about that document we'd signed so eagerly in our 20s, both of us convinced we were protecting each other. Now it felt like a trap I'd walked into blindly. And our accounts?
Something flickered across Oliver's face, too quick to interpret, but it made my stomach clench with new dread. Everything will be handled fairly, according to the agreement. There was something in his tone, something evasive about the way he said handled fairly, that sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers, scanning the legal documents inside. Most of it was standard divorce language, but one section made my blood freeze. Oliver, this says you've already withdrawn your portion of our joint accounts. I have, as of this morning. Your portion? These documents show you withdrew everything. Our entire savings, our checking account, even the emergency fund. His jaw set in a hard line. I liquidated my assets to make a clean start possible. Your assets? That money was ours, Oliver. 15 years of our combined earnings, our shared savings, our joint emergency fund. Actually, if you check the account records, you'll find that roughly 80% of those deposits came from my income. I'm simply taking what's rightfully mine. I stared at him in disbelief. I worked part-time to support your career. I managed our household. I entertained your clients. I sacrificed my own ambitions so you could build the practice. That money represents both of our contributions to this marriage. And now the marriage is over. He picked up his briefcase and headed toward the door. Just like that, 15 years dismissed with the emotional weight of a business transaction. Oliver, you can't just leave me with nothing. He paused in the doorway, not turning around. You'll be fine, Marianne. You're resourceful. You'll figure it out. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the office that had once been the heart of our shared life, holding divorce papers and staring at the empty spaces where his presence used to be. The silence that followed Oliver's departure felt deafening. I sat in that chair for what felt like hours, staring at the divorce papers, trying to process what had just happened. The legal language blurred together as tears I didn't even realize I was crying fell onto the documents. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. I needed to see for myself. I needed to confirm that this nightmare was real. The banking app loaded slowly, each second stretching into eternity. When the numbers finally appeared on my screen, the world tilted sideways. Our joint checking account, which had held $47,000 just yesterday, showed a balance of $127.43. Our savings account, our carefully built nest egg of $156,000, showed zero. Even our money market account, the one we'd been feeding for our planned kitchen renovation, had been completely emptied.
No, no, I whispered, refreshing the app over and over, hoping the numbers would change, hoping this was some terrible mistake.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
But they remained the same. Oliver hadn't just taken half, he'd taken everything. I called the bank with trembling fingers, praying that somehow this was a system error, that our money was just temporarily misplaced in some digital limbo. Mrs. Devereaux, the customer service representative's voice was sympathetic but firm. I see the concern, but all the withdrawals were authorized. Your husband had full access to these accounts, and the transfers were completed this morning at 8:47 a.m. 8:47? While I was making his coffee, while I was humming along to the radio, planning our weekend, completely oblivious to the fact that my husband was systematically destroying our financial life. Ma'am, are you still there? Yes, I'm here. Can you tell me where the money was transferred? I can see that the funds were moved to an account at First National, but I can't provide specifics about the receiving account without proper authorization. First National? That wasn't our bank. Oliver had opened new accounts, planned this entire financial ambush, and I'd been completely blind to it. After hanging up, I walked through our house like a ghost, seeing everything with new eyes. The family photos lining the hallway seemed to mock me now. Our wedding picture on the mantelpiece looked like evidence of an elaborate con game. How long had he been planning this? How long had he been living a double life while I foolishly believed we were building a future together? I found myself in our bedroom, staring at the closet where Oliver's fide had been completely cleared out. Even his cologne was gone from the dresser. This hadn't been a sudden decision, born from this morning's conversation. This was methodical, calculated. He'd been slowly removing pieces of himself from our life, and I'd been too trusting to notice. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a wild moment, I hoped it might be Oliver, telling me this was all a mistake, that he'd come to his senses and was coming home. Instead, it was from my neighbor, Claudette Hale. Marianne, I hate to bother you, but I saw a moving truck at your house this morning while you were out. Everything okay? A moving truck? While I was at my yoga class, completely unaware that my marriage was ending, Oliver had been orchestrating the removal of his belongings. He'd planned every detail, every moment, every cruel revelation. I called Claudette back immediately. Claudette, what exactly did you see? Well, honey, I didn't want to pry, but there were 3 men loading boxes and furniture into a truck. Oliver was directing them, and there was a young woman with dark hair helping coordinate everything. I assumed you knew. A young woman with dark hair. Cynthia. She'd been here, in our house, helping Oliver pack up our life while I was gone. She'd stood in our bedroom, our kitchen, our living room, probably laughing about the clueless wife who had no idea her world was crumbling. Did they take much? I'm so sorry, Marianne. They took quite a bit. His office furniture, some of the artwork, that beautiful leather sectional from your living room. The woman seemed to know exactly what they wanted. She had a list. A list. Oliver and his mistress had systematically cataloged which of our possessions they wanted for their new life together. They'd divided up 15 years of accumulated memories and belongings like they were splitting up business assets. Claudette, I need to ask you something, and please be honest with me. How long has this been going on? The woman, have you seen her before? There was a long pause. Marianne, sweetie, I've seen her car in your driveway several times over the past few months, always during the day when you were at work. I thought maybe she was a client or something, but what? Well, last month I saw them together on your back patio. They were sitting very close, and it didn't look like a business meeting. Last month. My neighbor had witnessed my husband's affair happening literally in my backyard, and I'd been completely oblivious. How many other people knew? How many of our friends, our colleagues, our neighbors had been watching this unfold while I remained blissfully ignorant? I hung up with Claudette and walked back to Oliver's office, looking at it with fresh eyes. The missing diploma, the cleared desk, the empty bookshelves. This wasn't the aftermath of a sudden decision. This was the final stage of a long-term exit strategy. I opened his desk drawers, hoping to find something, anything that might help me understand. Most were empty, but in the bottom drawer, I found a folder he'd apparently forgotten. Inside were bank statements from First National dating back 6 months. 6 months of regular deposits growing larger over time. He'd been siphoning money from our joint accounts gradually, building his escape fund while I trusted him completely. The statements showed something else that made my stomach turn. Regular payments to Riverside Gardens apartments, monthly payments of $3,200. He'd been maintaining a separate apartment for months, probably the love nest he shared with Cynthia while coming home to me every night like nothing had changed. But it was the final document in the folder that broke me completely. A real estate purchase agreement, dated just 2 weeks ago. Oliver Jerome and Cynthia Curtis were buying a house together. A $450,000 house in the prestigious Brookhaven neighborhood with a down payment of $90,000. $90,000. Our money. My money. The savings we'd built together over 15 years, the emergency fund I'd contributed to religiously, the vacation money we'd been setting aside, all of it had become the down payment on Oliver's new life with his mistress. I sank into the chair again, clutching the purchase agreement. They weren't just having an affair. They were building a whole new life together, funded by the systematic theft of everything Oliver and I had worked for. While I'd been making dinner, doing laundry, managing our household, believing we were partners, he'd been planning his escape with mathematical precision. The cruelest part wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that I'd been funding my own abandonment. Every dollar I'd saved, every sacrifice I'd made to build our joint future had actually been building Oliver's separate future with another woman. As I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of what I thought was my life, one thought kept echoing in my mind. Oliver thought he'd left me with nothing. He thought he'd been clever, taking everything while leaving me helpless and broken. What he didn't know was that tomorrow was my 38th birthday. And what he definitely didn't know was that my grandmother's trust fund, the one that had been locked away since I was 18, finally matured on my 38th birthday. Oliver thought he'd calculated every angle, but he'd made one critical error. He'd never bothered to fully understand what I was truly worth. The next morning, I woke up on the couch in Oliver's former office, still clutching the real estate documents. My neck ached from sleeping in an awkward position, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation that crashed over me as soon as consciousness returned. For a split second, I'd forgotten. Then reality hit like a freight train. I needed to understand the full scope of what Oliver had done. The bank statements I'd found were just the beginning. I spent the morning methodically going through every financial document I could find, creating a timeline of Oliver's deception. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about him leaving me for another woman. This was systematic financial fraud. The joint credit card statements told a story I'd been too trusting to see. Over the past 8 months, there had been charges I'd never questioned. Expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never been to together, hotel stays in the city when Oliver claimed to be working late, jewelry purchases from stores I'd never heard of. One particularly painful entry showed a $4,500 charge at Cartier, dated just 3 weeks ago. When I'd asked Oliver about working late that night, he'd said he was reviewing contracts with a client. Instead, he'd been buying jewelry for his mistress with our money. I found more evidence in our home office filing cabinet. Oliver had been meticulous about keeping financial records, probably for tax purposes, but his organization had become my window into his betrayal. Credit applications I'd never seen, loan documents with forged signatures, investment account statements showing money I didn't know we had being systematically withdrawn.
The worst discovery came when I found a folder labeled Property Investments hidden behind our tax returns. Inside were documents showing that Oliver had taken out a home equity line of credit against our house 6 months ago, borrowing $120,000 against the property we'd nearly finished paying off. The money had been transferred to various accounts, and based on the bank statements I'd found, it had all gone toward funding his new life with Cynthia. Our house, the home I helped design, the place where I'd planned to grow old, was now carrying debt I'd never agreed to. Oliver had used our most valuable asset as collateral for his affair. I called our mortgage company, dreading what I might learn. Mrs. Devereaux, yes, I can confirm that a home equity line of credit was opened on your property 6 months ago. The current outstanding balance is $118,000. I never signed those documents. I'm looking at the paperwork now, and I do show your signature on the application. My signature. I asked them to fax me copies of the documents, and when they arrived an hour later, I stared at what was obviously a forged version of my signature. Oliver had practiced it well. It was close enough to pass casual inspection, but I could see the differences. The way he'd formed the M in Marianne was slightly off, and the final flourish on Devereaux was too controlled, lacking the natural flow of my actual signature. But proving forgery would be nearly impossible without expensive legal help I couldn't afford, especially now that Oliver had drained our accounts. The phone rang, startling me from my investigation. The caller ID showed Jerome and Associates, Oliver's law firm. Marianne, this is Jeremy Curtis. I recognized the voice of Oliver's senior partner. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Jeremy Curtis. Curtis. The same last name as Cynthia. My blood ran cold as I realized this wasn't a coincidence. Actually, Jeremy, it's not a great time. I understand this must be difficult. Oliver briefed me on the situation yesterday. I'm calling because there are some procedural matters we need to discuss regarding his departure from the firm. His departure? Yes, Oliver submitted his resignation yesterday, effective immediately. Normally, we'd require more notice, but given the circumstances. What circumstances? There was a pause. Marianne, I assumed you knew. Oliver and my daughter Cynthia are relocating together. They've asked me to handle some of the legal aspects of Oliver's transition. Jeremy Curtis was Cynthia's father. Oliver's boss was the father of his mistress, and he was helping coordinate my husband's betrayal. Jeremy, did you know about their relationship? Another pause, longer this time. Marianne, I'm not comfortable discussing. Did you know your daughter was having an affair with a married man? Did you know Oliver was stealing money from our joint accounts to fund their relationship? I think this conversation should probably happen through attorneys. I think you're probably right. I hung up, my hands shaking with fury. Oliver hadn't just betrayed me with some random secretary. He'd betrayed me with the boss's daughter, and the boss was helping cover it up. The entire firm was complicit in this conspiracy. I forced myself to keep digging. In Oliver's home computer, which he'd apparently forgotten to wipe clean, I found email chains that made me physically sick. Messages between Oliver and Cynthia dating back 10 months, discussing their situation and how to handle Marianne when the time came. One email from Cynthia, dated just 2 weeks ago, read, "Daddy says the house paperwork should be finalized by month end. I can't wait to start decorating our home. Do you think Marianne suspects anything? You've been acting guilty lately." Oliver's response, "Marianne doesn't suspect anything. She's too comfortable, too trusting. She thinks our marriage is solid. It'll be a shock, but she'll get over it eventually. People are resilient." Too trusting, too comfortable. Oliver had seen my faith in our marriage as a weakness to exploit, not a gift to treasure. But the final email in the chain was what broke me completely. It was from Oliver to Cynthia, sent just yesterday morning while I was at yoga class. "Everything is in motion. Accounts are cleared, house equity is secured, and I'll have the conversation with M this afternoon. By tonight, we'll be free to start our real life together. She'll never see it coming, and by the time she figures out how to respond, we'll be settled in Brookhaven with enough money to start fresh.
She contributed so little to our financial situation that she'll barely be an inconvenience to shake off. Barely an inconvenience. 15 years of marriage, and I was an inconvenience to shake off? I printed every email, every bank statement, every document I could find. Oliver thought he'd been clever, but he'd left a digital trail of his betrayal that read like a manual for financial infidelity. As I organized the evidence, one thing became crystal clear. Oliver hadn't just left me for another woman. He'd systematically robbed me to fund his escape, forged my signature to steal equity from our home, and coordinated with his mistress and her father to ensure I'd be left with nothing. What Oliver didn't know was that in 24 hours, when I turned 38, everything would change. My grandmother's trust fund would mature, and suddenly his carefully calculated plan to leave me helpless would become the foundation of his own destruction. But first, I needed to understand exactly how much damage he'd done, because tomorrow I was going to start fixing it all and making sure Oliver paid for every single dollar he'd stolen. I was still surrounded by stacks of evidence when I heard Oliver's key in the front door. My heart lurched. For a moment, I thought he might be coming back, that maybe he'd realized what a catastrophic mistake he was making. Then I heard voices. Plural. He wasn't alone. "Just grab the artwork from the dining room," Oliver's voice carried through the house, "and check the kitchen for anything we missed." We. He'd brought Cynthia back to our home. I quietly gathered up the financial documents and emails I'd been reviewing, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and humiliation. Through the office window, I could see a small moving truck parked in our driveway. They weren't just taking a few forgotten items, they were conducting a second raid on our life together. I heard footsteps on the hardwood floors, accompanied by a woman's voice I'd never heard before. "Oliver, what about this painting? It would look perfect in our living room." "Take it. Marianne never really appreciated art anyway." The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. That painting, a landscape we'd bought together during our honeymoon in Tuscany, had been one of my favorite pieces. I'd spent hours looking at it, remembering that perfect week when we'd been so happy, so in love. Or at least when I thought we were. I couldn't stay hidden in the office. This was still my home, at least for now, and I wasn't going to cower while they looted our memories. I walked into the living room to find Oliver and Cynthia standing by our bookshelf, casually selecting items like they were shopping. Cynthia was younger than I'd expected, probably in her late 20s, with the kind of polished appearance that screamed expensive maintenance. She was wearing a cream-colored designer dress that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. "Marianne," Oliver's voice was flat, showing no embarrassment at being caught with his mistress in our home. "I didn't expect you to be here." "Where exactly did you expect me to be? This is my house." Cynthia looked up from the books she'd been examining, giving me a once-over that was clearly meant to be dismissive. "Oliver said you might be difficult about this." Difficult? I was being difficult by existing in my own home while they stole my possessions? "I'm sorry, I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Marianne, Oliver's wife of 15 years. And you are?" "Cynthia Curtis." She extended a manicured hand like we were meeting at a cocktail party. "Oliver's told me so much about you." I ignored her hand. "I'm sure he has. All good things, I hope." Oliver stepped between us. "Marianne, we're just collecting a few things that belong to me. We'll be out of your way soon." "Things that belong to you?" I gestured around the room. "Like the couch you bought with our joint account, or the artwork we selected together, or maybe the silverware from our wedding registry." "The divorce papers clearly outline asset division." "The divorce papers you filed without telling me, based on financial information you falsified?" I pulled out some of the bank statements I'd discovered, like these credit card charges for jewelry I've never seen, or hotel stays I knew nothing about, or this home equity loan you took out with my forged signature. Oliver's face went pale. He'd thought I would be too devastated or too trusting to investigate. He'd underestimated me completely. Cynthia, however, seemed unfazed. Oliver, we don't have time for this drama. The moving truck is on the clock. Drama? My marriage ending was drama to this woman? You know what's interesting, Cynthia? I turned to face her directly. I found some of your emails on Oliver's computer, the ones where you discuss how to handle the Marianne situation. Very touching, really. Her confident expression faltered slightly. I don't know what you think you found. I found everything. I pulled out printed copies of their email exchanges, your discussions about using my money for your house down payment, your plans to keep the affair secret until Oliver could secure the assets, your lovely comment about me being too stupid to see what's right in front of my face. Oliver grabbed for the papers, but I stepped back. Those are private communications between my husband and his mistress, conducted on devices paid for with my money, discussing the theft of my assets. I don't think privacy is your strongest legal argument here, Oliver. Marianne, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Oliver's voice took on the patronizing tone he used with difficult clients. We can handle this like adults. Adults? You mean like how you handled our marriage, with lies, theft, and fraud? Cynthia huffed impatiently. Oliver, she's just being vindictive. Can't we call the police or something? Call the police? I almost laughed. Yes, let's call them. I'd love to show them these forged loan documents and explain how my husband emptied our joint accounts to buy a house with his girlfriend. Those transfers were legal, Oliver started. Legal, but not ethical, and definitely not honest. I looked between them. These two people who'd systematically destroyed my life while convincing themselves they were the victims. Cynthia's mask of politeness finally slipped. Look, Marianne, I know this is hard for you, but Oliver wasn't happy. He hasn't been happy for years. Sometimes people grow apart, and it's better for everyone if they just accept reality and move on. Move on, I repeated the word slowly. With stolen money and forged documents? Oliver earned that money. Oliver earned his salary. I earned mine. The joint accounts represented our combined contributions to this marriage. The house equity belonged to both of us. He had no right to take any of it without my consent. Oliver stepped forward, his lawyer instincts finally kicking in. Marianne, I strongly advise you not to make accusations you can't prove in court. Court? I smiled, and something in my expression must have unnerved him because he actually took a step back. Oliver, you're absolutely right. Court is exactly where this belongs. And when we get there, I'm going to make sure the judge sees every email, every forged document, every fraudulent transaction. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are. You can't. I can, and I will, because you made one crucial mistake in all your careful planning. What mistake? Cynthia demanded. I gathered up my evidence, holding it against my chest like armor. You thought I was weak. You thought I was helpless. You thought I'd be too broken or too stupid to fight back. You can't. I can, and I will, because you made one crucial mistake in all your careful planning. What mistake? Cynthia demanded. I gathered up my evidence, holding it against my chest like armor. You thought I was weak. You thought I was helpless. You thought I'd be too broken or too stupid to fight back. I headed toward the office, then paused at the doorway. Oh, and one more thing. Tomorrow is my birthday, my 38th birthday, to be exact. You might want to ask your father-in-law about the significance of that date, Cynthia. He's a lawyer. I'm sure he'll appreciate the legal implications. I left them standing in our living room, looking confused and slightly worried. They had no idea what I was talking about, but they knew it wasn't good news for them. Let them wonder, let them worry, because tomorrow everything would change, and Oliver's perfectly planned betrayal would become the foundation of his complete destruction. I spent the rest of that evening in my bedroom, listening to Oliver and Cynthia moving around downstairs, taking pieces of our life together. Every sound, the scraping of furniture, the clink of dishes being packed, their muffled conversations, felt like another wound being carved into my heart. But underneath the pain, something else was building, a cold, focused determination that surprised me with its intensity. At exactly 11:47 p.m., I heard Oliver's key turn in the lock one final time, followed by the sound of the moving truck pulling away. The house fell into a silence so complete it felt like a held breath. I walked downstairs to survey the damage. The living room looked like it had been ransacked by very polite burglars. They'd taken the expensive artwork, the leather furniture, even the coffee table we'd bought for our first apartment. What remained looked sparse and sad, like the skeleton of a life rather than a home. But as I stood there in the ruins of my marriage, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Happy early birthday, Marianne. Tomorrow changes everything. Sleep well. A friend who knows your worth." I stared at the message, my heart racing. Who could have sent this? How did they know about my birthday? More importantly, how did they know about tomorrow's significance? I tried calling the number, but it went straight to a generic voicemail. I texted back, "Who is this?" but received no response. The message felt like a lifeline thrown into dark water. For the first time since Oliver's betrayal began, I didn't feel completely alone. I barely slept that night, alternating between grief over my marriage and anticipation about what tomorrow would bring. At 6 a.m., my phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Devereaux, this is Malcolm Nyland from Harcourt & Associates. I apologize for calling so early, but I have some time-sensitive matters to discuss with you regarding your grandmother's estate." My grandmother's estate? Adelaide Harcourt had died when I was 18, leaving me a trust fund that I'd barely thought about in 20 years. The terms had been specific. I couldn't access it until my 38th birthday. And I'd been so young when she died that the whole thing had felt abstract, like something that might never actually happen. "Mr. Nyland, can we meet today? It's my birthday, and I believe some funds become available." "Indeed they do, Mrs. Devereaux. Quite substantial funds, actually. Could you come to our offices this morning? Say 9 a.m.? By 8:30, I was sitting in the elegant waiting room of Harcourt & Associates, trying to calm my nerves. The office felt like old money. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, oil paintings of stern-looking men in period dress. This was a different world from the modern glass and steel offices I was used to. Malcolm Nyland turned out to be a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He led me into his office and gestured to a chair across from his massive mahogany desk. "Mrs. Devereaux, first, let me wish you a happy birthday. Your grandmother would be very proud to see the woman you've become." He pulled out a thick file with my name on it. "As you know, Adelaide Harcourt established a trust fund for you when you were born. The terms were quite specific. The principal was to remain untouched and invested until your 38th birthday, at which point it would become yours entirely. Mr. Nyland, I have to ask, what's the current value of the trust?" He smiled, the expression of someone about to deliver very good news. "Mrs. Devereaux, your grandmother was an astute investor, and her financial advisors have been equally skilled. The trust has been invested in a diversified portfolio for 38 years." He slid a document across the desk. I looked at the number at the bottom and felt the world tilt sideways. $2,347,000. $2.3 million. I was suddenly, inexplicably wealthy. "There's more," Malcolm continued. "Your grandmother also left specific instructions that were only to be opened on your 38th birthday." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandmother's elegant handwriting. Inside was a letter dated 20 years ago. "My dearest Marianne, if you're reading this, you've reached your 38th birthday, and the trust I established for you is now yours. I chose this age specifically because by 38, you'll have learned who you really are and what you're truly capable of. I've been watching over you through the years in ways you might not expect, and I want you to know that you are stronger than you realize. If life has knocked you down, and I suspect it might have, because that's what life does to strong women, this money is your foundation to rebuild. But remember, darling girl, money is just a tool. The real power lies in knowing your own worth and never letting anyone convince you otherwise. Use this gift wisely, use it boldly, and never ever let anyone make you feel small again. All my love, Grandmother Adelaide. P.S. Mr. Nyland has been instructed to provide you with any assistance you need. He's been watching over this trust for 20 years, and he cares about your welfare almost as much as I do. I looked up at Malcolm, tears streaming down my face. The text message last night, was that from you? He smiled mysteriously. Your grandmother asked me to keep an eye on you, Mrs. Devereaux. When certain public records indicated you might be going through some difficulties, I thought a little encouragement might be helpful. You know about Oliver? I know about the divorce filing. I know about the suspicious financial activity. And I know that you're about to have options your husband never imagined. For the first time in 3 days, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: hope. Oliver thought he'd left me powerless and broken. He thought he'd calculated every angle, stolen every resource, left me with nothing. He had no idea that his wife had just become a millionaire. I walked out of Malcolm Nyland's office feeling like I was floating 6 inches above the ground. The weight of the trust fund documents in my purse felt both surreal and empowering. $2.3 million. The number kept echoing in my mind as I drove home through the familiar streets of Riverside Hills, but everything looked different now. I wasn't the helpless, abandoned wife Oliver thought he'd left behind. I was a woman with resources, with options, with power he couldn't even imagine. But Malcolm had been very clear about one thing: I needed to be strategic. Don't do anything dramatic immediately, he'd advised as I prepared to leave his office. Your husband has shown himself to be calculating and potentially vindictive. If he discovers your new financial situation too quickly, he might try to find ways to claim a portion of it in the divorce proceedings. Better to let him continue believing he has all the advantages while you quietly put your pieces in place. So I went home and did something that felt almost surreal in its ordinariness. I made myself lunch. I sat at my kitchen table, eating a turkey sandwich and drinking tea, while mentally calculating how completely I could destroy Oliver's carefully laid plans. The normalcy of the moment felt like wearing a disguise. Over the next few days, I fell into a routine that would have looked unremarkable to any outside observer. I went to the grocery store, picked up dry cleaning, even attended my regular book club meeting on Thursday evening. But underneath this veneer of normal life, I was quietly setting forces in motion that would change everything. Malcolm had recommended a law firm that specialized in complex divorce cases involving hidden assets and financial fraud. I met with Carter Jerome, ironically no relation to Oliver's firm, despite the name, on Wednesday afternoon. His office was in downtown, and walking into that glass tower felt like stepping into a different version of myself. Mrs. Devereaux, Carter said after reviewing the evidence I'd brought, your husband has made several critical errors. The forged signatures alone give us grounds for criminal charges, not just civil remedies. I don't want him to go to prison, I said, surprising myself with the admission. I just want justice. Carter smiled grimly. Sometimes the threat of criminal prosecution is more effective than actually pursuing it. It gives us significant leverage in negotiations. I also spent those quiet days doing something Oliver would never have expected. I got educated. I read every article I could find about financial fraud in divorce cases. I researched asset protection strategies. I even took an online course about personal finance and investment management. If I was going to be wealthy, I was going to be smart about it. My neighbor Claudette stopped by on Friday afternoon with a casserole and concerned questions. "Marianne, honey, how are you holding up? I know this must be devastating." I accepted the casserole gratefully and invited her in for coffee. Sitting in my partially empty living room, I found myself oddly calm. "You know, Claudette, I think I'm going to be okay." "Are you sure? I mean, financially, how will you manage? This house, the bills?" I almost smiled. If she only knew. I have some resources Oliver doesn't know about, family money. It wasn't entirely a lie. The trust fund was family money, technically, but it felt good to hint at the power shift that was coming without revealing my full hand. Well, that's something at least. What about the house? Oliver took out a home equity loan without my knowledge, but I think I can handle the payments. Handle them? I could pay off the entire mortgage tomorrow if I wanted to. But Malcolm had advised patience, strategy, careful timing. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since discovering Oliver's betrayal. I opened a bottle of wine and ran myself a bath. As I soaked in the hot water, I let myself imagine the conversation I would eventually have with Oliver. The look on his face when he realized how completely he'd miscalculated. The moment when his smug confidence crumbled into panic. But more than revenge, I found myself thinking about freedom. For the first time in years, I could make choices based purely on what I wanted, not what we could afford or what made sense for our joint future. I could travel, start a business, buy a different house, help other people. The possibilities felt endless. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Everything in place? Remember, timing is everything. Don't let emotion override strategy. I texted back, "Who are you really?" The response came quickly. Someone who believes women like you deserve better. Someone who wants to see justice done properly. Trust the process. Somehow, those words from my mysterious ally felt more comforting than anything anyone had said to me since this nightmare began. Someone was watching. Someone was helping. Someone believed I deserved better. On Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after Oliver had walked out, I was sitting on my back patio with coffee and the newspaper when my phone rang. Oliver's name flashed on the screen, and for the first time since he'd left, I felt genuinely excited to talk to him. Not because I missed him, but because I was ready to begin his education about exactly what kind of woman he'd decided to betray. I answered on the fourth ring, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Hello, Oliver." What he said next would begin the most satisfying conversation of my life. "Marianne, we need to talk." Oliver's voice carried a tension I hadn't heard before, a note of uncertainty that was completely unlike his usual confident demeanor. "About what?" I kept my tone neutral, even as satisfaction bloomed in my chest. "There's been some kind of mistake with the bank accounts. They're saying there's suspicious activity on my new accounts, and they've frozen everything pending some kind of investigation." I nearly smiled. Carter Jerome worked fast. "That sounds concerning, Oliver. What kind of suspicious activity?" "They won't tell me specifics, but they mentioned something about potential fraud connected to the source of the funds. It's ridiculous. That money came from our joint accounts. I had every right to transfer it." "Did you mention the forged home equity loan?" The silence on his end stretched long enough that I could practically hear his lawyer brain processing the implications of my words. "What are you talking about?" "The $120,000 you borrowed against our house using my forged signature. Did you mention that to the bank when they asked about the source of your funds?" "Marianne, I don't know what you think you found." "I found everything, Oliver. The loan documents with my clearly forged signature, the emails between you and Cynthia planning how to handle the Marianne situation, the purchase agreement for your Brookhaven house using my stolen money as a down payment." I paused, letting that sink in. "You went through my private communications?" "Your private communications about stealing my money? Yes, I did, and I copied everything." I could hear him breathing heavily through the phone. "Marianne, you need to understand." "No, Oliver, you need to understand something. I've been very busy this week while you've been playing house with your girlfriend. I've hired a lawyer who specializes in financial fraud. I've documented every forged signature, every unauthorized transfer, every theft you committed during our marriage." "Theft? Marianne, you're being dramatic." "Am I? Because my lawyer thinks we have enough evidence for criminal charges. Wire fraud, forgery, identity theft. Apparently, these are federal crimes when they cross state lines. Did you know that, Oliver? Did your law degree cover the penalties for federal financial crimes?" The silence stretched longer this time. When Oliver spoke again, his voice had lost all of its earlier condescension. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You thought you could steal from me and walk away clean because you assumed I was too weak or too stupid to fight back." "I never said you were stupid." "You said I was too comfortable, too trusting. You told Cynthia I'd be barely an inconvenience to shake off. You called me an obstacle to remove from your path to happiness." "You don't understand the context of those messages." "The context was you and your mistress planning to rob me blind while laughing about how naive I was. There's no other context, Oliver." I stood up from my patio chair and walked to the edge of my garden, looking at the roses Oliver and I had planted together 3 years ago. They were blooming beautifully, completely indifferent to the destruction of our marriage. "Marianne, listen to me carefully. We can work this out between us, but if you involve lawyers and make this public, it's going to get very ugly for everyone." "It's already ugly, Oliver. You made sure of that when you decided to commit fraud." "I'm trying to be reasonable here." "No, you're trying to avoid consequences." My phone beeped with a call waiting. I glanced at the screen. Carter Jerome. "Oliver, I need to take another call. My lawyer is on the other line." "Marianne, don't do anything rash. Think about what's best for both of us." "What's best for both of us would have been you not stealing from me in the first place. But since we're past that point, I'm going to do what's best for me." I switched to Carter's call. "Marianne, I have some interesting updates. The bank investigation moved faster than I expected. They've not only frozen Oliver's accounts, but flagged them for potential money laundering violations." "Money laundering?" "When someone uses forged documents to obtain loans and then immediately transfer large sums to different institutions, it triggers automatic federal monitoring systems. Oliver's financial activity over the past 6 months has created what we call a pattern of suspicious behavior." I felt a surge of vindictive pleasure. What does that mean practically? It means Oliver can't access any of the money he stole from you. It also means federal investigators are now looking at his financial history. If they find evidence of systematic fraud, which we know they will, this becomes a federal case. How long before he realizes how serious this is? Based on what you've told me about his call, I'd say he's starting to understand, but I don't think he grasps the full scope yet. He's still thinking like this is a civil divorce matter he can negotiate his way out of. When will he learn otherwise? Soon. I've also filed motions to freeze all marital assets pending a full forensic audit. That includes the house, any retirement accounts, investment portfolios, everything. Oliver won't be able to sell, transfer, or hide anything else while this plays out. And the house he bought with Cynthia? That's where things get really interesting. Since the down payment came from fraudulently obtained funds, the title company is now investigating the sale. There's a good chance that transaction will be voided entirely. I thought about Cynthia, probably decorating their new love nest right now, having no idea that her dream house was about to become a legal nightmare. Carter, there's something else I need to tell you, something Oliver doesn't know about me. What's that? I just inherited a substantial trust fund, $2.3 million. The pause that followed was so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. Marianne, that changes everything. With that kind of financial security, we can pursue this case as aggressively as needed without worrying about your ability to cover legal costs. More importantly, it means Oliver's attempt to leave you financially devastated has backfired spectacularly. I smiled, finally letting myself feel the full satisfaction of my position. He has no idea, does he? None whatsoever. And when he finds out, it's going to be the most expensive mistake of his life. The next morning, I was reviewing financial documents at my kitchen table when an unmarked black sedan pulled into my driveway. 2 people in business suits got out, a woman with short blonde hair and a tall man with a leather briefcase. They looked exactly like what they were, federal investigators. My doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m. Mrs. Devereaux, I'm Agent Ariel Hale with the Financial Crimes Unit, and this is Agent Malcolm Curtis with the FBI's White Collar Crime Division. We'd like to speak with you about some financial irregularities we've discovered in connection with your estranged husband. I invited them in, offering coffee, which they politely declined. We sat in my living room, still sparse from Oliver's theft of our furniture, while they opened their briefcases and pulled out thick files. Mrs. Devereaux, we're investigating what appears to be a sophisticated pattern of financial fraud involving your husband, Oliver Jerome, and his associate, Cynthia Curtis. We understand you may have information relevant to our investigation. Agent Hale spread several documents across my coffee table. Bank statements, loan applications, transfer records. Some I recognized from my own investigation, others I'd never seen before. How extensive is this investigation? I asked. More extensive than your husband realizes, Agent Curtis replied. What started as routine monitoring of suspicious banking activity has uncovered a network of fraudulent transactions spanning multiple states and institutions. Agent Hale pointed to a timeline they'd created. The pattern begins approximately 8 months ago with small, regular transfers from joint accounts to new accounts opened under Oliver Jerome's name. These transfers gradually increased in size and frequency. Then 6 months ago, Agent Curtis continued, we see the initiation of fraudulent loan applications, home equity loans, personal credit lines, even business loans using fabricated employment information. I studied their timeline, seeing my marriage destruction laid out in financial data points. What kind of amounts are we talking about? Total fraudulent activity appears to exceed $400,000, Agent Hale said. Your husband has been systematically exploiting multiple credit sources, using both legitimate and fraudulent means. $400,000? I'd thought Oliver had stolen $200,000 from our joint accounts and home equity. The actual scope was twice what I'd discovered. There's more, Agent Curtis said, pulling out another set of documents. Cynthia Curtis's father, Jeremy Curtis, has been facilitating some of these transactions through his law firm's trust accounts. We believe he's been helping Oliver move money in ways designed to hide it from forensic accounting. Jeremy Curtis, Oliver's boss, Cynthia's father, had been actively helping them commit federal crimes. Jeremy Curtis is also under investigation? I asked. Let's say we're examining his financial activities very carefully, Agent Hale replied diplomatically. Using attorney trust accounts to hide marital assets is a serious violation of both federal law and legal ethics. Agent Curtis leaned forward. Mrs. Devereaux, we need your help to build a comprehensive case. You've already provided substantial evidence to your divorce attorney, but we need you to walk us through everything you discovered in your own words. For the next 2 hours, I told them everything. I showed them Oliver's abandoned computer files, the printed emails between him and Cynthia, the forged loan documents, the timeline of suspicious charges on our credit cards. I explained how I'd pieced together their plan to steal our joint assets and disappear to Florida with Cynthia's father's help. You've done remarkable investigative work, Agent Hale said when I finished. Most fraud victims don't discover this level of detail about their spouse's criminal activity. I had strong motivation, I replied dryly. Agent Curtis smiled grimly. Yes, betrayal tends to sharpen one's focus. There's one more thing we need to discuss with you, Mrs. Devereaux. He pulled out a different folder. Our investigation has revealed that you recently inherited a substantial trust fund. We need to ensure that these assets are properly protected and that your husband can't claim any portion of them in divorce proceedings. My heart stopped. How do you know about the trust fund? Financial institutions are required to report large asset transfers to federal monitoring systems, Agent Hale explained. When someone goes from having minimal assets to suddenly controlling over $2 million, it triggers automatic reviews. Are you investigating me too? We're protecting you, Agent Curtis said firmly. Your husband's criminal activity could potentially be used by his attorney to claim he has rights to marital assets he wasn't aware of during the marriage. We're documenting that the trust fund predates his criminal behavior and was not accessible to either of you during the marriage. Agent Hale nodded. Essentially, we're building a firewall around your inheritance so Oliver can't touch it, even if his lawyers get creative. There's something else, Agent Curtis said. We have reason to believe Oliver and Cynthia are planning to leave the country. They've been researching real estate in non-extradition countries and making inquiries about international banking. My blood chilled. They're going to run? They're certainly preparing for that possibility, which is why we need to move quickly. We're going to arrest Oliver and the Curtises within the next 48 hours, but we wanted to prepare you first. Arrest them? Agent Hale's expression was serious. Mrs. Devereaux, what your husband did to you wasn't just cruel, it was criminal. Wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, money laundering, conspiracy, these are serious federal crimes with serious penalties. How serious? Each count of wire fraud carries up to 20 years in federal prison. Bank fraud is another 30 years. When you add conspiracy charges and the sophisticated nature of the scheme, Oliver could be looking at decades behind bars. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed. I'd wanted justice, but I hadn't fully understood what federal justice looked like. Mrs. Devereaux, Agent Curtis said gently, you need to understand that this case goes far beyond your divorce now. Your husband's criminal activity has made this a federal matter. Even if you wanted to drop charges, which you can't at this point, the government is pursuing this case. What happens next? Tomorrow morning, Oliver Jerome will discover that his criminal career is over, Agent Hale said, and everything he stole from you is coming back with interest. The federal agents had been gone for less than an hour when Carter Jerome called with news that made my head spin. Marianne, you need to sit down for this. The FBI's investigation has uncovered something that makes Oliver's theft from you look like petty cash. I was already sitting at my kitchen table, still processing everything the agents had told me, but I gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean? Oliver and the Curtis family have been running a sophisticated embezzlement scheme through Jeremy Curtis's law firm for at least 2 years. They've been stealing from client trust accounts, estate funds, even charity accounts managed by the firm. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate, over $3 million. I felt dizzy. $3 million? It gets worse. Remember how I told you Oliver couldn't access the money he stole from you because his accounts were frozen? Well, the FBI just discovered he's been using those funds to pay back some of the client money they stole. Your marriage wasn't just funding his affair, Marianne. It was funding a massive criminal enterprise. I thought about all those late nights Oliver claimed he was working on client cases, all those weekend trips to the office that seemed to multiply over the past year. He hadn't been building his legal career, he'd been systematically robbing his clients. Who are the victims? That's what makes this so heinous. Elderly clients who trusted the firm with their life savings, widows whose husbands left them estates that Jeremy Curtis was supposed to manage, a children's cancer charity that had $200,000 in donations stolen. Each revelation felt like another punch to the stomach. I'd been married to a man who stole from cancer patients. Carter, how did they think they'd get away with this? The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Oliver would divorce you, take half the marital assets as his clean money, then disappear to a non-extradition country with Cynthia. Jeremy Curtis would retire early, claiming health problems, and slowly close down the trust accounts, making it look like legitimate business wind-down rather than theft. And Cynthia? She was the inside coordinator. Her job at the firm gave her access to client files, banking information, and trust account passwords. She's been the technical brains behind the operation. I thought about the young woman who'd stood in my living room just days ago, casually selecting my possessions like she was shopping. She hadn't just been Oliver's mistress, she'd been his criminal partner. The FBI agents mentioned they think Oliver and Cynthia are planning to flee the country. They've already started. According to the investigation, Oliver liquidated his 401k yesterday, paying massive penalties to get cash quickly. They've booked flights to Switzerland for this weekend. Switzerland, a country with strict banking privacy laws and no extradition treaty with the United States.
Carter, what about the other victims? The elderly clients, the charity?
That's where your situation becomes even more significant, Marianne. The FBI believes Oliver was planning to use your trust fund money to cover some of the stolen funds before disappearing. When you inherited that $2.3 million, it probably looked like a gift from heaven to him. My blood ran cold. He was going to steal my inheritance too? Think about it. Oliver filed for divorce immediately after your birthday, but he didn't know about the trust fund yet. He was probably planning to reconcile with you long enough to gain access to those accounts, then disappear with everything. I felt sick. Oliver's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was part of a larger pattern of victimizing vulnerable people. How many elderly clients had trusted him with their life savings? How many sick children wouldn't receive treatment because of money stolen from that charity? There's something else, Carter continued. The FBI found evidence that this isn't Jeremy Curtis's first rodent. He's been investigated twice before for questionable handling of client funds, but charges were never filed. Oliver knew about this history when he joined the firm. Oliver knew he was working for a criminal? More than that, the evidence suggests Oliver specifically sought out Jeremy Curtis because of his willingness to bend ethical rules. This whole relationship with Cynthia might have started as a business arrangement that became personal. I thought about the timeline Agent Hale had shown me. Oliver's suspicious financial activity had started 8 months ago, right around the time Cynthia joined the firm. Had their affair been genuine, or had it been part of a calculated plan to steal as much money as possible before disappearing? Carter, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Of course. If I hadn't inherited that trust fund, if I'd been left with nothing like Oliver planned, would anyone have investigated this? Would these other victims have gotten justice? There was a long pause. Probably not. Most financial crimes like this go undetected for years because the victims don't have the resources to hire forensic accountants or experienced criminal attorneys. Your inheritance gave you the power to fight back, and that fight exposed a much larger criminal conspiracy. I walked to my window and looked out at the neighborhood where I'd thought I was building a quiet, honest life with a man I trusted. How many other wives were sitting in their kitchens right now, unaware that their husbands were criminals? How many elderly people were trusting lawyers who were stealing their money? What happens to the other victims when Oliver and the Curtises are arrested? The FBI will freeze all assets they can locate and begin the process of returning stolen funds. It won't be everything. Some money has probably already been moved overseas, but it'll be something. My phone buzzed with a text from the unknown number that had been supporting me through this ordeal. The web is unraveling faster than they anticipated. Justice comes for those who prey on the vulnerable. Stay strong. I smiled grimly. Whoever my mysterious ally was, they were right. Oliver thought he was clever, thought he could steal from me and disappear into a life of luxury funded by other people's suffering. Instead, his greed had exposed a criminal conspiracy that was about to destroy multiple lives, including his own. Tomorrow, when the FBI knocked on his door, Oliver would finally understand what real devastation felt like. At 6:30 a.m. the next morning, my phone rang with a call from Agent Hale. Mrs. Devereaux, I wanted to give you a heads up. We're executing arrest warrants in approximately 1 hour. Oliver Jerome, Jeremy Curtis, and Cynthia Curtis will all be taken into custody simultaneously. I was already awake, having barely slept, anticipating this moment. Where will you arrest Oliver? At the Brookhaven house he purchased with your stolen money. We've had surveillance on the property since yesterday. He and Cynthia Curtis spent the night there, apparently packing for their planned departure to Switzerland. The irony wasn't lost on me. Oliver would be arrested in the house he'd bought with my money, preparing to flee the country with assets stolen from elderly victims and cancer patients. Agent Hale, what should I expect today? Media attention, unfortunately. A case this large, involving this much money and these kinds of victims, tends to attract news coverage. You might want to consider staying somewhere else for a few days. But I didn't want to hide. I wanted to be right here when Oliver's world collapsed. At exactly 7:45 a.m., my unknown ally sent another text. Turn on Channel 7 News. Justice is being served. I switched on the television just as the morning news anchor was saying, developing story this morning as federal agents arrest 3 people in connection with what authorities are calling one of the largest embezzlement schemes in state history. The screen showed aerial footage of the Brookhaven house Oliver and Cynthia had bought with my stolen money. FBI vehicles surrounded the property, and I could see agents in bulletproof vests escorting 2 figures in handcuffs toward waiting cars. Even from the helicopter's distance, I recognized Oliver's expensive suit and Cynthia's blonde hair. The arrests are connected to the systematic theft of over $3 million from client trust accounts, estate funds, and charitable donations managed by the prestigious law firm Jerome & Associates. The camera cut to footage of Jeremy Curtis being led out of his own law firm in handcuffs, looking pale and shaken. Employees and clients gathered on the sidewalk, watching in shock as their trusted attorney was loaded into a federal vehicle. My phone rang. Carter Jerome. Marianne, are you watching the news? I'm watching Oliver get arrested in the house he bought with my money. It's oddly satisfying.
It gets better. The FBI just called me with an update. They found packed suitcase in Oliver's car containing over $400,000 in cash, along with fake identification documents and airline tickets to Zurich. $400,000 in cash. Oliver hadn't just been planning to disappear, he'd been planning to disappear rich. Where did that cash come from? Final withdrawals from the law firm's accounts yesterday. Oliver and Jeremy Curtis liquidated everything they could access in the final 24 hours before their planned escape. I thought about those elderly clients, probably checking their account balances this morning, only to discover their life savings had vanished. Have the victims been notified? The FBI is beginning that process now. They're also freezing all associated accounts and assets. The Brookhaven house will be seized as proceeds of criminal activity. The news coverage continued throughout the morning. By 10 a.m., reporters had identified me as the estranged wife whose financial investigation led to the exposure of the massive fraud scheme. My doorbell rang constantly, reporters wanting statements, neighbors expressing shock and support, even a few people claiming to be victims of Jeremy Curtis's law firm. I decided to talk to one reporter, mainly because I wanted Oliver to hear exactly what I thought about his criminal career. Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News sat in my living room, noting the sparse furniture with professional curiosity. Mrs. Devereaux, your husband attempted to leave you financially devastated while stealing millions from vulnerable victims. How does it feel to know your investigation brought this criminal enterprise down? It feels like justice, I said simply. Oliver thought he could steal from me and disappear because he assumed I was too weak or too trusting to fight back. He made the same assumption about his elderly clients and the families who trusted him with their most important assets. What was the key moment when you realized the scope of his criminal activity? When I found emails between Oliver and Cynthia Curtis discussing how to handle the Marianne situation and secure the assets. They weren't just having an affair, they were coordinating a criminal conspiracy, and I was one of their victims. The FBI reports that you've recovered most of your stolen assets. What's next for you? I smiled, thinking about the trust fund Oliver had never known existed. I'm going to make sure the other victims get their money back. And I'm going to make sure Oliver understands that actions have consequences. That afternoon, Malcolm Nyland called with news that made me laugh out loud. Marianne, I just heard from my contacts in the federal prosecutor's office. Oliver's attorney is already trying to negotiate a plea deal. Already? He was just arrested this morning. Apparently, when federal agents showed him the evidence they'd gathered, including all the documentation you provided, Oliver realized how thoroughly his criminal activity had been exposed. His lawyer is trying to minimize prison time by offering cooperation against Jeremy Curtis. He's going to betray Jeremy Curtis to save himself? Honor among thieves is apparently a myth. Oliver is ready to provide evidence against the man whose daughter he was planning to disappear with if it means reducing his own sentence.
I thought about Cynthia, probably sitting in a federal holding cell right now, learning that her lover was preparing to testify against her father. Malcolm, what kind of prison time are we looking at? For a scheme this sophisticated, involving this much money and these kinds of vulnerable victims, Oliver is looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. Jeremy Curtis could get even more as the ringleader. 15 to 20 years. Oliver would be in his 60s when he got out of prison, assuming he served the minimum sentence. My phone buzzed with one final text from my mysterious ally. The man who tried to steal your future just lost his own. Well done, Marianne. You've given justice to people who thought they had none. As I sat in my quiet house that evening, I realized Oliver had been right about one thing. Actions do have consequences. He just never imagined the consequences would be his. The first call came at 11:47 p.m. that same night. I'd been expecting it, but the sound of my phone ringing in the darkness still made my heart race. Oliver's name flashed on the screen. He was calling from jail. I let it ring 4 times before answering, savoring the moment. "Hello, Oliver." "Marianne, thank God. I only get one phone call, and I need your help." His voice was completely different from the cold, confident man who'd walked out of our house a week ago. This Oliver sounded desperate, broken, afraid. Help with what? This is all a misunderstanding. The FBI, they're saying I stole millions of dollars, but you know that's not true. You know I'm not a criminal. I almost laughed. Actually, Oliver, I know exactly what kind of criminal you are. I'm the one who gave the FBI most of their evidence. The silence stretched so long, I wondered if the call had been disconnected. You what? I gave them every email between you and Cynthia, every forged document, every fraudulent transaction. I documented your entire criminal enterprise and handed it to federal investigators on a silver platter. Marianne, you don't understand what you've done. If I go to prison for this, it destroys both of our lives, my reputation, my career, our joint assets. Our joint assets? I interrupted. You mean the money you stole from me? The house equity you forged my signature to access? The retirement funds you liquidated without my knowledge? That money was meant to secure our future. No, Oliver. That money was meant to secure your future with Cynthia Curtis while you left me penniless. The FBI explained your whole plan to me. I could hear him breathing heavily through the phone. What plan? Marianne, you're being paranoid. The plan to steal my inheritance when I turned 38? The plan to disappear to Switzerland with $3 million in stolen money? The plan to leave elderly clients and cancer patients holding worthless investment statements while you lived in luxury? How do you know about... He stopped abruptly, realizing he'd just confirmed everything. How do I know about Switzerland? The fake IDs? The $400,000 in cash you were carrying when they arrested you? I let each revelation sink in. Because the FBI knows everything, Oliver. Every detail of your criminal conspiracy. Marianne, listen to me. I can fix this, but I need you to not cooperate with their investigation. If you refuse to testify, I don't have a choice about testifying. This is a federal criminal case now. But even if I did have a choice, why would I help you? Because I'm still your husband. Because 15 years has to count for something. The audacity was breathtaking. 15 years did count for something, Oliver. It counted for enough that you should have thought twice before stealing from me, forging my signature, and planning to abandon me for your criminal girlfriend. Cynthia isn't my girlfriend anymore. Oh, that's right. I heard you're planning to testify against her father to reduce your own sentence? Very romantic. How do you know about the plea negotiations? I know everything now, Oliver. I know about the client trust accounts you emptied. I know about the elderly victims whose life savings you stole. I know about the children's cancer charity you robbed. He was crying now. I could hear it in his voice. This man who'd coldly dismissed our 15-year marriage as an inconvenience to shake off. Marianne, please, I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just borrowing some money temporarily, but then it got complicated. It got complicated when you decided to steal millions of dollars from vulnerable people. I was going to pay it back. The Switzerland thing, that was Cynthia's idea. I just got scared when everything started falling apart. Everything started falling apart when you decided to become a criminal, Oliver. Marianne, I'm begging you. I know I made mistakes, but if you could find it in your heart to forgive me, maybe we could work this out. Maybe we could rebuild. Rebuild? The suggestion was so absurd I actually laughed. Oliver, you're going to federal prison for 15 to 20 years. What exactly are we rebuilding? The prosecutor said if I cooperate fully, if I provide evidence against Jeremy Curtis and help them recover the stolen funds, I might get reduced time, maybe 7 to 10 years. And you think I'll wait for you? I think 15 years of marriage means something. I think the woman I married wouldn't abandon me when I need her most. The woman you married wouldn't have stolen from elderly people and cancer patients. The woman you married wouldn't have forged documents and committed federal crimes. The woman you married deserved better than what you became. I paused, letting him absorb that. But here's what's really going to devastate you, Oliver. You want to know why I'm not destroyed by your betrayal? Why I'm not begging you to come home? What are you talking about? My grandmother's trust fund matured on my 38th birthday. I'm worth $2.3 million, Oliver. While you were stealing from me to fund your criminal enterprise, I became independently wealthy. The sound he made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. All your careful planning, all your systematic theft, all your cruel calculations about leaving me helpless, it was for nothing. You destroyed your life, your freedom, and your future for money I didn't even need. That's impossible. You would have told me. Why would I tell you about money I couldn't access until I turned 38? Money you would have probably tried to steal too. The line went quiet, except for the sound of Oliver crying. The most beautiful part, I continued, is that you could have simply asked for a divorce. I probably would have been generous in the settlement. Instead, you chose to become a federal criminal, and now you'll spend the next 2 decades in prison. Marianne, goodbye, Oliver. Enjoy federal prison. I hear they're particularly hard on lawyers who steal from elderly people. I hung up on my husband for the last time. 3 days later, Carter Jerome called with news that made my blood boil. Marianne, Oliver's attorney has filed a motion claiming you have hidden marital assets that should be considered in the divorce proceedings. They're arguing that the trust fund should be divided as marital property. That's insane. The trust fund predates our marriage and was completely inaccessible during our entire relationship. I know, and we'll fight it, but there's something else. Oliver wants to meet with you in person. He's claiming he has information about recovered assets that could benefit you. I almost laughed. He wants to manipulate me into supporting his plea deal. Probably, but the federal prosecutor thinks it might be worth hearing what he has to say. If Oliver knows where more stolen money is hidden, it could help the other victims. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet Oliver at the federal courthouse, with both our attorneys present. I wanted to look him in the eye one final time and make sure he understood exactly what he'd lost. The courthouse conference room was stark and institutional, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. Oliver was already there, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual expensive suits. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. When I walked in, he stood up quickly, hope flickering across his face. Marianne, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I sat down across from him without returning his greeting. Your attorney said you have information about recovered assets. I do, but first I need you to understand something. About us, about what happened. Oliver, I'm not here for a reconciliation conversation. I'm here because stolen money belonging to elderly people and cancer patients might be recovered. That's the only reason. His lawyer, a tired-looking public defender named Robert Nyland, leaned forward. Mr. Jerome has identified several offshore accounts where substantial funds were hidden. He's prepared to provide full access to these accounts in exchange for certain considerations. What considerations? Oliver spoke up. I want you to write a letter to the judge asking for leniency in my sentencing. I want you to tell them that our marriage can be rebuilt, that I have family support for rehabilitation. The audacity was staggering. You want me to lie to a federal judge? I want you to consider the possibility that people can change, that 15 years of marriage means I deserve a second chance. Oliver, you stole from cancer patients. You forged my signature. You plan to abandon me penniless while disappearing to Switzerland with $3 million in stolen money. What part of that suggests you deserve a second chance? I made mistakes. Mistakes? I leaned forward, my voice rising. Oliver, stealing a candy bar is a mistake. What you did was a systematic criminal enterprise that destroyed innocent people's lives. His public defender intervened. Mrs. Devereaux, the offshore accounts contain approximately $1.2 million that could be returned to victims. Your husband is the only one who knows how to access them. Then he should provide that information unconditionally as part of making amends for his crimes. Oliver's mask of contrition finally slipped. Unconditionally? Marianne, I'm looking at 20 years in federal prison. I need some leverage to reduce that sentence. You need leverage? I stared at him in disbelief. Oliver, you're holding stolen money hostage to reduce your prison time. You're literally extorting cancer patients and elderly victims for your own benefit. That's not what I'm doing. That's exactly what you're doing. You're saying you'll only return stolen money if you get a reduced sentence. How is that different from the theft itself? Carter Jerome spoke up. Marianne, we should consider this carefully. If Oliver provides the account information, it could help a lot of people. Fine. Oliver, I'll make you a deal. I looked directly at my husband. Provide the account information for all the hidden money. Give full cooperation to help every victim recover their stolen funds. Do that, and I'll consider writing a letter to the judge. Hope flickered in Oliver's eyes. You will? I'll write a letter telling the judge exactly what kind of man you are. I'll describe how you stole from me, forged my signature, planned to abandon me, and stole from cancer patients and elderly people. I'll recommend the maximum possible sentence to ensure you never have the opportunity to victimize anyone else. The hope died instantly. Marianne, that's not what I meant. That's the only letter I'll ever write about you, Oliver. A letter telling the truth about your character and your crimes. Oliver turned to his attorney. Can she do that? Can she write a letter recommending maximum sentencing? Anyone can write a victim impact statement, the public defender replied wearily. And yes, they can recommend maximum sentencing. I stood up. Oliver, I want you to understand something clearly. You didn't just steal money from me. You stole my trust, my faith in our marriage, my belief that you were a good person. You stole 15 years of my life that I spent building a future with someone who turned out to be a stranger. Marianne, I'm not finished. You also stole from people who trusted you with their life savings, elderly people who can't rebuild their financial security, families who donated to cancer research believing their money would help sick children. You stole hope from people who had already lost so much. I leaned on the table, looking directly into his eyes. So no, Oliver, I won't help you reduce your sentence. You don't deserve a reduced sentence. You deserve every single day of the 20 years they're going to give you. Oliver's face crumpled. Please, Marianne, I know I hurt you, but I'm still the man you married. I'm still the man you fell in love with. No, you're not. The man I married was an illusion, a character you played when it was convenient. The real you is sitting in that orange jumpsuit trying to bargain stolen money for a lighter prison sentence. I gathered my purse and stood to leave. Provide the account information, Oliver. Help the victims you created. Do it because it's the right thing to do, not because you want something in return. And if I do, then maybe someday, when you're old and gray and getting out of federal prison, you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror without seeing a monster. I walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. Oh, and Oliver, the divorce papers will be filed tomorrow. I'm keeping the house, since you can't pay the mortgage from prison anyway. Consider it partial compensation for the money you stole from me. Marianne, wait. But I was done waiting. I was done listening. I was done being married to a federal criminal who'd tried to destroy my life. Oliver could spend the next 20 years thinking about the choices he'd made. I was going to spend the next 20 years living the life he'd tried to steal from me. 2 weeks after Oliver's arrest, I received a call that changed my perspective on everything that had happened.
Mrs. Devereaux, this is Dr. Patricia Hale from the National Center for Elder Justice. I'm calling because your investigation into your husband's criminal activity has had far-reaching implications beyond your personal case. I was sitting in my home office, formerly Oliver's office, reviewing financial documents with my new investment advisor. The trust fund money was being carefully managed and diversified, ensuring I'd never be vulnerable to financial betrayal again. What kind of implications? Your documentation methods and the evidence you gathered have become a model case study for how financial fraud victims can protect themselves and build criminal cases. We'd like to invite you to speak at our national conference about victim empowerment. The idea was both terrifying and appealing. Dr. Hale, I'm not an expert. I'm just someone who got angry enough to fight back. That's exactly why your story is so powerful. Most financial fraud victims feel helpless and overwhelmed. You proved that careful documentation and persistence can expose even sophisticated criminal schemes. Over the following days, I received similar calls from victim advocacy groups, law enforcement training programs, and even a university criminology department. My amateur investigation had apparently impressed professionals who dealt with financial crimes every day. Agent Ariel Hale from the FBI called with an update that made me proud of what I'd accomplished. Marianne, I wanted you to know that Oliver provided the offshore account information. We've recovered $1.2 million that's being returned to victims. How many people will get their money back? 43 elderly clients will recover their stolen life savings. The Children's Cancer Charity will get back $180,000. Several families who trusted Jeremy Curtis with estate management will recover substantial portions of their inheritances. That's incredible. It wouldn't have happened without your investigation. Most of these victims didn't even know they'd been robbed until your evidence exposed the entire scheme. Malcolm Nyland called later that day with news that felt like cosmic justice. Marianne, I have an interesting update about the Brookhaven house Oliver bought with your money. What about it? Since it was purchased with proceeds from criminal activity, the government is seizing it. But here's the beautiful part. They're auctioning it to recover funds for victims. And as the primary victim, you have first right of refusal to purchase it at auction. I almost laughed. You're telling me I can buy back the house Oliver purchased with my stolen money? At a significant discount, yes. The auction estimate is about 60% of what Oliver paid for it. What would I do with a house that's tainted by so much betrayal? You could turn it into something positive, maybe a safe house for financial fraud victims, or a training center for elder abuse prevention. The idea had immediate appeal. Taking the house Oliver had bought as a symbol of his criminal success and transforming it into a resource for protecting future victims felt like perfect justice. Malcolm, I want to make the purchase, and I want to dedicate the property to victim advocacy. I'll handle the paperwork. That evening, I sat in my garden watching the roses Oliver and I had planted together. They were still blooming, still beautiful, completely indifferent to the human drama that had unfolded around them. My phone buzzed with a final text from my mysterious ally. You've turned your pain into purpose, your betrayal into justice. Your grandmother would be very proud. I finally understood who had been helping me. Malcolm Nyland had been more than just my grandmother's attorney. He'd been her friend, and he'd been watching over me just as she'd asked him to do. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt genuinely happy about the future. 6 months after Oliver's arrest, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The woman who'd been cowering in her kitchen while her husband packed his bags had become someone I barely recognized, and I loved who I was becoming.
The Brookhaven house purchase had finalized, and I'd spent the past month converting it into the Harcourt Center for Financial Justice, named after my grandmother. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house Oliver had bought with stolen money to start his new criminal life had become a sanctuary for his victims. "Marianne, the center is ready for its first group session," announced Dr. Claudette Jerome, the trauma counselor I'd hired to help financial fraud victims process their experiences. She was no relation to Oliver's former firm, just an unfortunate coincidence in surnames that we'd learned to laugh about. The living room where Oliver and Cynthia had probably planned their escape now hosts support groups for elderly people. The master bedroom where they'd celebrated their criminal success had become an office where victims could access free legal consultations and financial planning services. How many people are we expecting today? 12 confirmed attendees, plus 3 family members who want to learn how to protect their elderly relatives. I walked through the house one final time before the session began. In the kitchen, where Oliver and Cynthia had probably toasted their criminal enterprise, I'd installed a coffee station and comfortable seating for informal conversations. The home office, where they'd planned their Switzerland escape, now housed computers loaded with financial security software and educational materials. The first support group session was emotional but empowering. Elderly victims who'd felt ashamed and helpless discovered they weren't alone. Adult children who'd blamed themselves for not protecting their parents learned about the sophisticated nature of financial predators.
Mrs. Devereaux, said Carter Nyland, an 82-year-old retired teacher who'd lost $150,000 to Jeremy Curtis's scheme, "I want you to know that having this place, having someone who understands, it's given me hope again." Mr. Nyland, you've given me hope too. Seeing how strong all of you are, how determined you are to rebuild and protect others, it reminds me why fighting back was worth it. After the session ended, I received a call from Agent Ariel Hale with news that felt like the final piece of justice falling into place. "Marianne, the sentencing hearings are scheduled for next week. Oliver will receive 18 years in federal prison. Jeremy Curtis got 22 years, and Cynthia received 12 years plus restitution requirements." 18 years. Oliver would be nearly 60 when he was released, assuming he served his full sentence. His law license was permanently revoked, his reputation destroyed, his criminal enterprise completely dismantled. What about the victim's restitution? Thanks to the offshore accounts Oliver revealed and the seized assets, we've recovered about 80% of the stolen funds. It's not perfect, but it's substantially better than most financial fraud cases. Agent Hale, I have a question. What happens to repeat offenders like this? Do they usually reoffend when they're released? Honestly, men like Oliver who lose everything, their careers, their freedom, their families, they tend to be broken by the experience. At 60, with a federal conviction record, he'll be lucky to get a job at a grocery store. That evening, I stood in the garden behind the Harcourt Center, looking at the new roses I'd planted to replace Oliver's stolen landscaping. These roses were different varieties, stronger, more resilient, chosen for their ability to thrive in difficult conditions. My phone buzzed with a text from Malcolm Nyland. "Your grandmother's foundation has approved the first annual grant to expand the center's services. Adelaide would be so proud of what you've built from the ashes of betrayal." I smiled, thinking about my grandmother's letter encouraging me to use her gift wisely and boldly. I'd done both, and in the process, I'd discovered strength I never knew I possessed. Oliver had tried to steal my future, but instead, he'd given me a purpose I never would have found otherwise. 1 year after Oliver's sentencing, I was reviewing applications for the Harcourt Center's Victim Advocacy Scholarship program when my assistant knocked on my office door. "Marianne, there's a woman here who says she needs help. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's been crying in the parking lot for 20 minutes. I looked up from the scholarship files. We were funding 12 victims to attend law school or financial planning programs, turning their trauma into expertise that could protect others. Send her in. The woman who entered my office was probably in her 50s, well-dressed but clearly devastated. She reminded me painfully of myself a year ago. That same combination of shock, betrayal, and desperate hope that someone might be able to help. "Mrs. Devereaux, I'm Ariel Curtis.
I know that name probably means something terrible to you, but I'm Jeremy Curtis's sister-in-law. My husband wasn't involved in any of the criminal activity, but she started crying again. I handed her tissues and waited patiently. I'd learned that rushing traumatized people never helped. My brother-in-law, Jeremy's brother, he's been stealing from our family business for 3 years, using the same methods Jeremy used at the law firm. We just discovered it yesterday when our accountant found discrepancies. My blood chilled. Another Curtis family member, another financial predator, more innocent victims. Ariel, how much money are we talking about? $800,000 from the business accounts, but that's not the worst part. She looked up at me with eyes full of pain. He's been stealing from his own children's college funds, from his elderly mother's care fund, from the family trust that was supposed to take care of my special needs daughter. I felt the familiar surge of anger that had driven me to expose Oliver's crimes. Some people preyed on the most vulnerable members of their own families. Have you contacted the police? Malcolm says if we report him, it'll destroy the family business, and everyone will lose their jobs. 23 people work for us, Mrs. Devereaux. Some of them have been with the company for decades. The classic manipulation tactic, making victims feel responsible for protecting the very criminal who'd victimized them. Ariel, what Malcolm is doing is criminal. The fact that reporting him might have consequences doesn't change that. I know, but I don't know how to fight this. I don't know how to protect my family without destroying everyone else's livelihood. I leaned forward, recognizing the same helplessness I'd felt when Oliver first betrayed me. Ariel, you're not responsible for the consequences of Malcolm's criminal choices. He created the situation, not you. But I don't have the resources to fight him. He controls the business accounts, the legal relationships, everything. What if you did have resources? What if you had legal support, financial backing, and people who understood exactly what you're going through? Hope flickered in her eyes. What do you mean? I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a business card for the new initiative I'd been developing, the Harcourt Foundation's Emergency Response Team for Financial Crime Victims. Ariel, I'm going to help you expose Malcolm Curtis and recover every dollar he's stolen, and we're going to do it in a way that protects the innocent employees and family members. You would do that? I would do that, because no one should have to face financial predators alone.
Over the next 2 hours, I called in my growing network of allies. Carter Jerome, my divorce attorney, who'd become the Foundation's legal counsel. Agent Ariel Hale, who'd left the FBI to head our criminal investigation unit. Dr. Claudette Jerome, our trauma counselor, who specialized in family financial abuse. This is what we've been building toward, I told my team as we planned our strategy. Not just helping victims after the fact, but intervening in active criminal situations to prevent further damage. By evening, we had a comprehensive plan to expose Malcolm Curtis while protecting the innocent people whose livelihoods depended on the family business. We would document the crimes, coordinate with law enforcement, and ensure victim recovery, all while maintaining the company's operations under new, honest management. As Ariel left that day, she turned back to me with tears of gratitude. Mrs. Devereaux, why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Because a year ago, I was exactly where you are now. Someone helped me when I felt helpless, and now it's my turn to help someone else. That night, I realized my transformation was complete. I was no longer Oliver's victim or even his former wife. I was someone who turned personal trauma into a mission to protect others. Oliver had tried to destroy me, but instead, he'd created his worst nightmare, a woman with unlimited resources and an unshakable commitment to exposing financial predators. The foundation was growing, our reach was expanding, and justice was becoming a full-time job I actually loved. 2 years after Oliver walked out of our house with his suitcase, I stood in the garden of the Harcourt Center, watching our latest graduation ceremony. 12 financial fraud survivors had just completed our victim advocacy training program, ready to help others rebuild their lives from the ashes of betrayal. If you're listening to this story and recognizing pieces of your own life, I want you to understand something crucial. You are not powerless.
even when someone you trusted has betrayed you completely. When Oliver drained our accounts and walked away, he thought he was leaving behind a broken woman who would quietly accept her fate. He assumed I would be too devastated, too trusting, too weak to fight back. He was wrong about all of it. The trust fund was just money. What really saved me was the decision to refuse to be a victim. Every document I photographed, every email I printed, every phone call I recorded was an act of rebellion against someone who thought I didn't matter. Your betrayer, whoever they are, is counting on your silence. They're betting you'll be too ashamed, too overwhelmed, or too afraid to expose them. They believe you'll protect their reputation while they destroy your life. Don't give them that gift. Document everything. Screenshot those messages. Print those bank statements. Take photos of those documents. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong because they're probably right. Find your allies. Lawyers, investigators, advocacy groups, family members who believe you. You don't have to fight alone, and you don't have to be wealthy to demand justice. Most importantly, remember that their betrayal reveals their character, not yours. Their choices to lie, steal, and deceive say nothing about your worth as a person. Oliver tried to steal my future. Instead, he gave me a purpose I never would have discovered otherwise. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing you'll ever build. You are stronger than you know. You are worth more than they want you to believe, and you deserve so much better than what they gave you.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.